In 1882, a government geologist walked the rim of the Grand Canyon with a notebook and started naming its rock towers. He called one Isis Temple, another Osiris Temple, another the Tower of Set. A few miles over, Horus Temple, Tower of Ra, Cheops Pyramid, Buddha Temple, Buddha Cloister, Shiva Temple, Vishnu Temple, Brahma Temple. Those aren't nicknames invented for a documentary. Open the official U.S. Geological Survey map right now, and every one of those names is still there, printed in plain type on federal land. 27 years after that map was drawn, a newspaper published a story claiming explorers had found an actual ancient Egyptian civilization sealed inside a cave, in that exact stretch of canyon. Historians will tell you what happened next was a hoax, and the evidence for that is real. We're going to show it to you, piece by piece. But here's what almost nobody puts in the same video. Less than 20 miles from where that fake discovery was supposedly made, there is a real hidden site that a Native American nation has kept off every public map for generations. On purpose, and they are still doing it today. And in between those two extremes sits a cave that genuinely was used to hide something. For real. Thousands of years before either of them. One of these secrets is fake. Two of them are real. And for over a century, most people telling this story have blurred all three together without realizing it. Let's take them apart, one at a time. Every year, millions of people stand at the South Rim, look down a mile of open air, and see a canyon that looks completely exposed. Every layer of rock visible, every ridge lit by the sun, nothing to hide. That's the illusion. What you can see from the rim is a fraction of what the canyon actually contains. Beneath that visible rock face is a maze of caves, alcoves, and passages that most visitors never learn exist. Some of them documented, some of them still officially unrecorded, and at least one of them protected on purpose by people who have no interest in ever showing you where it is. To understand why the 1909 story fooled so many people, you have to start 30 years earlier, with a man named Clarence Dutton. Dutton was a U.S. Geological Survey geologist who mapped the Grand Canyon in the early 1880s, publishing his findings in a monograph called Tertiary History of the Grand Canyon District. When it came time to name the massive rock formations he was cataloging, he made an unusual choice. Instead of naming them after explorers, presidents, or local settlers, the way most American landmarks were named at the time, Dutton decided the canyon was too vast, too monumental, too ancient-looking to be named after ordinary people. In his own words, he believed the canyon's scale demanded names that reflected the world's great mythologies and religions. So he reached past American history entirely and pulled from Egyptian gods, Hindu deities, and even figures out of Arthurian legend. That's how the canyon ended up with Isis Temple, Osiris Temple, Horus Temple, Tower of Set, and Tower of Ra, clustered near 94 Mile Creek and Trinity Creek, and, a little further along, Cheops Pyramid, Buddha Temple, and Buddha Cloister, in an area some maps still label Haunted Canyon. A government cartographer named François Matthes added more names during a follow-up topographic survey in 1902, extending Dutton's mythological theme even further across the canyon's map. Here's why that detail matters. When a story broke in 1909 claiming an actual Egyptian civilization had been found inside the canyon, it wasn't inventing something out of nowhere. It was landing on ground that already sounded Egyptian on official government maps for 30 years. The names were already there, waiting, for anyone who wanted to make a fabricated discovery feel more believable than it had any right to be. Keep that in your head. We're coming back to it. April 5th, 1909. The Arizona Gazette runs a front-page story under the headline, Explorations in Grand Canyon, mysteries of immense rich cavern being brought to light. Jordan is enthused. The story names a man, G.E. Kincaid. According to the article, Kincaid had been traveling alone down the Colorado River when he spotted an opening roughly 2,000 feet above the water, cut into the cliffs of Marble Canyon. Climbing up, he claimed he found a passage leading into a vast underground network, a long central corridor with chambers branching off it in every direction, rooms stacked with copper tools, weapons, and carved statues the article compared to Buddhist imagery. Deeper in, rows of mummified remains, seated upright rather than laid flat, wrapped and preserved. The article claimed Kincaid then partnered with a professor, identified only as S.A. Jordan, and that the excavation was being carried out with backing from the Smithsonian Institution. The piece didn't undersell it. It called the find not only the oldest archaeological discovery in the United States, but one of the most valuable in the world. 4 days later, on April 9th, the Gazette ran a second article, expanding on the layout of the cave and the artifacts supposedly inside it, treating the first story not as a rumor, but as an ongoing, credible expedition. To a reader in 1909, this didn't read like fiction. It read like the biggest archaeological headline of the decade. And then, nothing. No follow-up story. No photographs of the chambers were ever released. No artifacts ever entered a museum collection anywhere in the country. No scientific paper. The most significant archaeological discovery in American history, according to the newspaper that reported it, simply stopped being reported on, as if the expedition itself had walked into the canyon and never come back out. That silence is where this story either falls apart or gets more interesting, depending on what you do next. So people went looking, and what they found is some of the clearest debunking work in American folklore. First, nobody has ever located a historical record of a G.E. Kincaid matching the explorer described in the story, or of a Smithsonian archaeologist named S.A. Jordan. Not in Smithsonian personnel files, not in expedition logs, not in any university archive anyone has been able to produce. Second, and this is the detail that convinces most researchers on its own, the article refers throughout to the Smithsonian Institute. The organization's actual name, then and now, has always been the Smithsonian Institution. That's the kind of mistake someone writing about the Smithsonian from the outside would make, casually, without checking. It is not the kind of mistake the Smithsonian's own staff would make about their own employer. Third, in the early 2000s, as the story exploded across early internet forums, the Smithsonian's Department of Anthropology issued a direct written response to one of the many inquiries it had started receiving. In their words, their files contained no mention of a Professor Jordan, no Kincaid, and no lost Egyptian civilization in Arizona. And yet, the response noted, the story kept being repeated in books and articles, regardless. Museum staff have said since that the inquiries never really stopped. Fourth, and this is the part almost no retelling of this story includes, researchers with the Grand Canyon Historical Society went back through more than a dozen Arizona newspapers from April 1909. Almost all of them ignored the Gazette story entirely. Only one paper, the Coconino Sun in Flagstaff, commented on it at all, and it pointed a finger at a specific man. Joe Mulhattan, a traveling salesman notorious across the entire country in the late 1800s for planting elaborate, detailed fake stories in regional newspapers just to see how far editors would run with them. The New York Times had profiled him decades earlier, describing him as someone who had caused more trouble in newspaper offices than any other man in the country. Fabricating discoveries wasn't incidental to Mulhattan's reputation. It was his signature. So here's the most likely real sequence of events. A known hoax writer, operating in an era when newspapers regularly printed sensational, unverified stories purely to sell copies, set his fake discovery in the one stretch of canyon that already had Egyptian names sitting on the map. Because there, of all places, it would sound more plausible than anywhere else in the country. There's one more piece worth knowing, because it explains why nobody in 1909 immediately demanded federal proof. Just 3 years earlier, the Antiquities Act of 1906 had become law, giving the federal government legal authority over major archaeological discoveries made on public land, and the Grand Canyon already sat on protected federal ground. A real discovery of this scale should have triggered federal paperwork almost immediately. It never did. No permit request, no federal excavation record, not a single government document acknowledging the expedition existed at all at the exact moment in American history when one should have been required. The story then went quiet for decades until it resurfaced in 1962 inside a collection of old Arizona newspaper clippings called Arizona Cavalcade, and then again in 1992 when a writer argued that the Smithsonian's denial wasn't proof the story was false. It was proof of a cover-up. That reframing is what turned a forgotten local hoax into a modern conspiracy theory. It's since been featured on the History Channel series America Unearthed and discussed as a serious possibility on major podcasts, more than a century after a traveling salesman most likely made the whole thing up to sell newspapers. It's worth asking why a debunked 1909 newspaper hoax still gets millions of views today. Part of the answer is simple psychology. A story about a hidden ancient civilization suppressed by a real trusted institution is more satisfying than a story about a con man who fooled a small-town paper for a slow news week. They found something and covered it up spreads faster than a known liar made this up, because the first version makes the reader feel like they're being let in on a secret, and the second one doesn't. That's not a flaw unique to this story. It's most of what makes any hidden history claim go viral, and it's worth remembering every time the next one shows up in your feed. That's the fake secret. Now here's the real one hiding right next to it. While the Kincaid cave was never real, the Grand Canyon does hide genuine, verified archaeological secrets, and one of them was found less than a mile from that same stretch of river. It's called Stanton's Cave, tucked into Marble Gorge. In 1934, a river-running party nicknamed the Dusty Dozen pulled ashore to explore it and stumbled onto small figures woven out of split willow twigs. At first, they assumed they were children's toys and left with only a few. Nobody realized what they'd actually found until 1954, when archaeologist Robert Euler formally excavated the site and recovered more than 100 of these figurines. Radiocarbon dating placed them at roughly 4,000 years old, made by a nomadic culture archaeologists call the Desert Archaic, thousands of years before any of the cultures usually associated with the canyon's better-known ruins. Several of the figurines had been deliberately pierced through the body with a tiny wooden spear. Not toys. Ritual objects, hidden deep in a cave that would have taken serious effort to reach, for reasons nobody has fully reconstructed even today. This is the part debunking articles almost never mention. The Grand Canyon genuinely was used to hide sacred, meaningful objects in remote caves by real people, thousands of years before newspapers existed. The 1909 story wasn't wrong because the general premise, hidden caves holding hidden objects, is absurd for this landscape. It was wrong because it invented specific people, a specific institution, and specific claims that fall apart the moment you look for a paper trail. The underlying idea that this canyon has held real, undocumented secrets in real caves turns out to be true, just not in the way the newspaper told it, and Stanton's Cave isn't an isolated case. Grand Canyon National Park currently has more than 400 documented caves within its boundaries, largely concentrated in a rock layer called the Red Wall Limestone. A volunteer research partnership between the park and the Cave Research Foundation has spent years mapping this system, and in that time alone the project has located nearly 200 previously unrecorded caves and surveyed over 70 miles of underground passage. And researchers are still finding new entrances during routine shoreline surveys, caves that are discovered, logged, and left waiting for a future team to actually go in and map them. Only a small fraction of those 400-plus caves have ever been open to public visitation. The rest stay closed, unmapped, or only partially explored, not because of any conspiracy, but simply because the canyon is enormous. The terrain is close to impossible, and there aren't enough people to survey it all. So before you even get to what the Hopi have kept hidden on purpose, the canyon is already, provably, one of the least explored landscapes in the continental United States. Which brings us to the secret that's still being kept right now, deliberately, by choice. Less than 20 miles from where the fake Egyptian cave was supposedly discovered, near where the Little Colorado River meets the main Colorado, there is a real geological formation, a dome built up over centuries from mineral deposits around a natural spring. It's called the Sipapuni. To the Hopi people, this is not a symbolic site. According to their Emergence tradition, passed down for generations through the clan system, most completely preserved by the Bear Clan, the present world is not the first one. Earlier worlds existed before this one and ended in catastrophe, and each time the survivors were guided somewhere safe before eventually being allowed to emerge into the next stage. This is the literal place where that last emergence happened, where the ancestors climbed up out of a previous destroyed world into the one we live in now. Before that emergence, the tradition holds, the ancestors sheltered underground during the catastrophe, protected by beings their oral history calls the Ant People, intelligent beings who lived inside underground chambers and already understood the world beneath the surface long before the Hopi arrived there. Different tellings describe them differently. Some remember them as unusually tall, others as covered in hair. But nearly every version agrees they belong to the world beneath the canyon, long before the Hopi built any villages on the mesas above it. Unlike the Kincaid story, this tradition was never written down for a newspaper, never attached to a government institution's name, and never needed outside verification to be preserved. It moved from elder to elder, inside the clan structure, for longer than anyone has kept written records at all. And it's worth pausing here, because it's easy to flatten a tradition like this into just another claim to be proven or debunked, the same way we just debunked Kincaid. But that's not really what it is, and treating it that way misses the point. A story doesn't have to be a literal transcript of events to be telling the truth about something. Sometimes a tradition survives for generations because it's carrying a real memory forward in a different shape. Not a police report of what happened, but a way of remembering it that a people decided was worth protecting, generation after generation. That's a fundamentally different kind of thing than a newspaper inventing a name and an institution to sell papers for a week. The Kincaid story was never real to begin with. The Hopi tradition was never trying to be proven in the first place. It was trying to be remembered. Those deserve to be talked about differently, and most retellings of this story never bother to make that distinction. Here's the detail most people never learn. The Sipapuni is physically closed, not gated with a fence you'd see on a satellite map, protected by something harder to get past, which is that its precise access route is known only to specific Hopi religious leaders, and it is deliberately kept out of public trail guides and tourist information. In the year 2000, the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office issued an official statement addressing sacred sites throughout the canyon. It didn't confirm the Arizona Gazette story. It didn't try to validate or debunk a single detail of the Kincaid hoax. It asked for something else entirely: respect and distance for places that are still actively used, still sacred, and still theirs to protect. So sit with what that actually means. A newspaper in 1909 invented a hidden chamber and borrowed a real institution's name to make it sound credible, and the whole thing collapsed under basic research within a few decades. Meanwhile, less than a day's hike from that same stretch of river, an indigenous nation has been protecting the real location of a sacred site for far longer than Arizona has existed as a U.S. state, without ever needing a newspaper, a fabricated professor, or a government agency to make anyone believe them. One secret was manufactured to grab attention for a few weeks in 1909. The other has survived for far longer than that, for the opposite reason. Almost no one outside the Hopi has ever been allowed to see it. It's tempting to think modern technology could finally settle all of this. That high-resolution LiDAR, or drone-based cave mapping, or a future archaeological survey could fly over the canyon and put every question to rest at once. And for the 400 documented caves and the passages still being logged by the Cave Research Foundation, that's probably true eventually. Given enough time and funding, most of that landscape will get mapped. But LiDAR can't find something that isn't there, which is why it will never produce a Kincaid cave. And it can't override a decision the Hopi have already made about a place that is there. Technology can survey a canyon. It can't unmake a promise a nation has kept for longer than most countries have existed. So if you take away only one thing from this video, let it be this: the Grand Canyon doesn't need a fake Egyptian tomb to be one of the most secretive landscapes in North America. It already is one. There's a documented 4,000-year-old ritual cave inside it. There are more than 400 other caves inside it, dozens of which are still being discovered and left unmapped. And there is a sacred emergence site inside it that a living nation is still actively, deliberately keeping hidden from the public. On purpose. Today, in 2026. The 1909 story got debunked because it was built on names and institutions that don't exist in any record. The real mystery was never solved, because it was never meant to be solved. By design, by the people who have actually protected it the longest. If you want the next one, a story historians still can't fully explain, and this time nobody made it up. Subscribe, because we're going back into these canyons.